Welcome to DC Insiders, where we bring you sharp views about global issues with relevance to Taiwan from the political capital of the world here in Washington, DC. I'm your host, Wenchi Yu. Supply chain security has become a paramount focus for countries worldwide, including Taiwan. Recent global events from the COVID-19 pandemic and geopolitical tensions to the race to technology supremacy have challenged the decades-long assumption that globalization, free market, and free trade would lead to prosperity and growth. Taiwan's supply chain security is a topic of immense global significance, primarily because of its central role in the global semiconductor industry. Its economic security and, by extension, its national security are fundamentally linked to the stability and resilience of its supply chains. To understand Trump 2.0's economic security policy and its implications on Taiwan's supply chain security, our guest today is Sarah Stewart, CEO and Executive Director of Silverado Policy Accelerator, a DC-based think tank. Sarah is a former senior official in the US Trade Representative responsible for environment and natural resources. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
So first, let's start with Taiwan's most treasured industry, semiconductors. I know you guys have done a lot of reports on this sector. Trump has said that numerous times that tariffs on semiconductors are coming, and it's going to be a 100% tariff on all semiconductors. But those who invest in the US will be exempt. What more have you heard other than these two things? What is the potential roadmap for the rollout of this tariff?
In August, President Trump had announced this 100% tariff. We've not seen any tariff announcement since that point that would provide a little bit more detail. And I think that the reason why is that the president is looking to get this right and working with companies, both U.S. Semiconductor companies as well as foreign semiconductor companies, to think about what does a real semiconductor plan look like
and
for
what does
the
it
US?
look like? I mean, really, because it's so complicated. And from your conversation in particular with commerce officials and maybe industry people, what's it gonna look like possibly?
Yeah, so I think that there's going to be two big components to watch for. One is, what does the investment piece of this look like?
So that's foreign investment?
That's foreign investment or U.S. company investment. I think the administration is really looking for hard commitments from the private sector of what are they going to do to increase fabrication capacity in the U.S. because it has fallen over time into many countries, but in the mature, or what we call at Silverado, foundational nodes, China has taken on such a leadership role that it is projected in the next few years to have so much production capacity in those foundational nodes, that's 28 nanometers and above, that it will be twice as large as even Taiwan. So, we have to think about where are we going to get the investments, and then what is the tariff regime going to look like? Here, I think what we're going to see is this is going to take the form of a component tariff. And what does that even mean?
Yeah, what does that mean?
So this is new parlance in DC that everybody's talking about. Yeah. Traditionally, a tariff goes on the item as it's imported into the United States.
Like a complete item?
Like a chip or a wafer. Okay. So we import about $2 billion worth of chips in their sort of raw form. Mm-hmm. Where they're not embedded into something else. A component tariff would actually put a tariff on the value of a chip that is produced in China or maybe in another foreign country while it's coming into the United States embedded in another product. So in a phone or in a car, for example. So this is...
But that's really hard to trace down and calculate, right?
This is, we don't have a system in place right now where we are requiring not even the US government as a procurer, let alone the private sector importers, to know exactly where all of the chips are that are inside of the downstream product that they are bringing in. So this would require a lot of different details to be fleshed out. So I think, as we're thinking about, where this is going, these are the things that I would keep in mind. On the investment side, so that's on the investment side. And then on the tariff side, we have to be looking at what is a component tariff regime going to look like? How much of the downstream market that includes chips will be covered by this? Because that's going to dictate what the economic impact will be.
But is your sense that, Commerce Department, I assume, is taking the lead on this, is consulting or speaking to the private sector?
Yeah, and I absolutely think that that's happening. I think that companies are having conversations at the highest levels of government. How that's going to translate in the end is still uncertain, but those conversations are taking place. And I think that, everybody is trying to get to the same place of increasing production capacity here while also protecting that investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, in addition to semiconductors, rare earths are also a core component of Taiwan's supply chain security. They're essential in semiconductors, green energy, EVs, and advanced manufacturing. I know you guys have published many reports and analysis on rare earths and especially China's dominance in this field. We've seen that being played out in the US-China negotiations. So can you help our audience understand why critical minerals are so critical, and what are some of the core issues of tension?
Sure. I think that this is an absolutely fascinating area. For some people, they have known for decades that this would be an area where sort of the modern battleground would be fought. It's only really bubbled up more in a mainstream sense. Recently, and I think a lot of that was illuminated during COVID, the COVID supply chain crisis.
Supply chain crises.
But an interesting fact is in 2010, there was a maritime dispute between Japan and China. And in retaliation, China actually halted its rare earth exports to Japan, which had an enormous reverberations across Japanese industry. And it actually even became the subject of a famous trade case that a lot of people followed. And at the time, the US government...
Were you in the US government?
I was not in the US government at that time, but the US government was acknowledging at that time, if this could happen to Japan, it could happen to us, it could happen to other allies that we have. We have to kind of get our heads wrapped around where are the supply chains for these critical minerals.
So that was back in 2010.
That was back in 2010. And actually, even prior to that, the US had a very dominant role in rare earths, dating back to World War II. We ceded that over time. And that, I don't think that there was a deliberate move to offshore that particular industry, but like many industries that have left US soil and gone to other places, there's cost reasons and tax reasons and other things. So we really lost leadership there.
If the US has the minerals, was it more refining process that the US has sort of ceded the leadership? So that's potentially that could be bring back to the US?
I think so. I think part of it is we have some minerals here, right? And we call critical minerals critical because of their essential aspect to national or economic security. There's about 55 or so minerals that we list as critical. And that list is actually up for review right now, with some being added and some being taken away. The U.S. government has a list. Actually, many governments have their own list, but this is a list that we have. It helps us to prioritize where are we going to put federal dollars or additional projects to help accelerate mining or refining or research, for example, into new technologies. So the criticality kind of stems from that. As you might imagine, even if you have the minerals geographically located in your borders, you can't just take a mineral out of the ground and pop it into a chip or a car. You have to do more processing. And that part of the process we really are not doing in the United States.
Is it because of cost?
it is cost. It's also, it's not the cleanest industry. And
So environmental
you have
concerns.
environmental concerns in local communities that have, complained. Nobody wants to have
Yeah.
a refining facility in their backyard. Now, there are some companies that are doing a fantastic job. They've, used technological innovations to make the process much cleaner, but we are not by any stretch a refining powerhouse. China is. I call it choke point China, because they knew and saw that they could really dominate this part of the value chain by building up at a large scale the technology and equipment needed to refine and process all these minerals. So on the rare earth side, China accounts for somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% of global refining capacity. So even if the US or Taiwan or other countries wanted to bring refining capacity to their own soil, it is going to be a big lift to try to extricate from the dependency that we have grown accustomed to with respect to China. When China, halted the rare earth exports from Japan, Japan has worked triple time to try to create more resiliency in that supply chain. And it has done a great job, but it's still 60% dependent on China for the processed rare earths today, 15 years later. So we've really got our work cut out for us when it comes to that. And I think what we saw this spring was we saw a weaponization of rare earths play out for a second time. So Japan, China, 2010, that was the first time. At Silverado and many other organizations, we saw the handwriting on the wall, and we actually worked on some tabletop exercises several years ago where, for members of Congress, and we said, listen, we have an ace in our sleeve on chips. Together with Taiwan, we are leading in advanced chip technology, right? And we have the ability through export controls and other measures to control who gets access to that technology and when and how much. But China also has an ace in its sleeve, which is the processing of critical minerals. And we need these minerals for everything from medical devices to robotics to data centers and defense, aerospace. So we said, we have got to minimize our dependency, and we have to do it yesterday, because there will come a time where the US is going to want to exercise its policy flexibility against China, whether it's on trade or with tariffs or export controls on chips. And China's going to push back.
It happened over the spring, and China knew to leverage their dominance in this sector to, in a way, force the US to, negotiate on a lot of other things. And so how is the US currently, now after learning that, addressing that vulnerability and together with potentially other allies, because it is a vulnerability to Taiwan and many other countries.
It absolutely is, and I think what we've seen, I'll commend the administration for taking quick action, in the wake of a crisis, but nevertheless, it was action that we desperately needed. We saw a deal with MP Materials, which is the only rare earth mine in North America, to try and build a domestic supply chain that would go from the mining of the rare earth all the way to the permanent magnet that you need for some of these end uses. We've got more work to do, for sure. A lot more to do. But, we're also seeing a lot of reduction of bureaucracy when it comes to permitting and other things that would be needed in order to resume doing more mining here, more refining here. Now, that's just what we're doing here. We have to work with other countries on this. We can't do this alone. It would be truly an impossible task.
There is a proposal about like a Quad Plus kind of supply chain. I mean, are you aware of it, and what is it like?
Yeah, so the Quad, which is India, Japan, Australia, and the US, they've been meeting on a lot of strategic issues, but one area has been this critical minerals initiative that would bring together all four countries to think about how can we do more in terms of critical minerals supply chain resiliency, as well as mineral recovery. There's a lot of minerals that can be recovered from society because they've been discarded. It's waste, but you can actually draw from that waste and reuse those minerals. So that's another source versus all the time going to virgin extraction. So the Quad, I think, presents a very viable regional platform to do more. And there's others. There's the Mineral Security Partnership. Taiwan, I believe, is an observer, but not a full member. I think that the Quad could expand into more of a Quad plus kind of strategy, and we're doing some writing on this at Silverado. I was very encouraged to see a trilateral statement that came out of the UNGA meeting.
US,
yeah, with Japan, US, and South Korea, also committing to, additional work on critical minerals. So, I mean, these are problems that we have to solve collectively. So it is encouraging to see that, allies and partners are working towards that with us. Yeah. But make no mistake, there's a lot of work that needs to be done there.
And one of the things I like about Silverado is also you're thinking, ahead of what's already in the mainstream, right? A recent report about data centers and servers, which again is very, very relevant to Taiwan. I don't think it's risen to the kind of mainstream discussion that it deserves. Tell us more about that report and the findings, especially, how Taiwanese firms roll in it.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we've been doing a lot of work on at Silverado is looking at supply chains. For example, let's take the critical mineral supply chain. This is an upstream key input. That alone has its own supply chain. You've got the ore, you have the refining equipment, then it's going to be processed and put into something else, maybe a battery or something else. That's its own supply chain. But that also feeds into other products like chips. And then chips has its own supply chain, right? And it's got chemicals and all sorts of other materials that you need. So as we were doing the work on critical minerals and on semiconductors, where are we then going? What are the semiconductors going to be used for? Well, a lot of these semiconductors are going to go into servers that are going to be in data centers, and that's going to enable this new AI boom, right? And we're seeing this everywhere in the world, not just in the US. So it occurred to us, let's look and do a deep dive on what do you need for AI infrastructure? So we know that the minerals will be a part of it. We know that the chips will be a part of it. But what are the other big components of building out a data center to support AI? And servers, it turns out, is 66% of the cost of a data center. So that is a huge driver. So making sure that if you're a company that's investing in AI or some other type of advanced computing and you are putting a data center together, yes, you need the steel, yes, you need the chips, but you also have to make sure that you have a resilient supply of cost competitive servers.
And that's where Taiwanese companies come to play.
And Taiwan is a major player in the global server market.
I think I saw some numbers that Taiwanese firms, they account for about between 80 to 90% of the shipments of some of the recent server productions.
Yes.
That is huge as well.
It is
And they
huge.
also dominate in terms of AI servers, not just, your traditional servers. So, and we've seen so many new announcements, like the Stargate project in Texas, SoftBank and Foxconn involved, and many others. So what would be sort of the significance of all these server and data center developments?
We will not be able to advance AI at the rate and the pace that we want to advance it if we don't have the computing capacity to do that. And that's where the data center comes in. Now, we also need energy, which is a whole other
topic.
separate topic. But we are seeing a projected demand for servers in the United States to meet this AI data center demand that's going to outpace even GDP. And yet we don't have indigenous server production that's going to be able to meet that demand. So we have Mexico as our leading supplier, but Taiwan is right in there, given its global prominence in this. And so what we're seeing is Taiwanese companies as well as US companies are making investments in the US because they see that demand going burgeoning. And so, some of that is going to come online in 2025. Other is going to come online in 2026. We know we need it. We know it's got to be cost competitive. It's a huge part of the supply chain that's going to enable some of these administration key initiatives, like achieving AI dominance, to actually come to fruition.
Yeah. So you've been watching this space for so long, and having worked in, I think, both the Obama administration as well as the Trump administration, and have worked outside of the government with both Biden as well as now Trump administration. Can you tell us how you see the different approaches to supply chain security?
I think that there was a recognition, particularly under the Biden administration, that's now being carried forward by the Trump administration, that we've got to reduce our exposure to choke points in supply chains, whether it's chips or minerals or, you name it. We have to reprioritize what we are going to manufacture at home, where we are going to work with allies and partners so that we have more diversity of supply. I don't think that there's a lot of daylight there, to be honest. Maybe the Biden administration favored a little bit more of working with allies, and we're doing more onshoring. But in the end, it's really all about resiliency and making sure that we don't have those dependencies. Because when the crisis hits, whether it's geopolitical or it's a weather crisis or it's a pandemic, and you're scrambling and you don't have the right factories up and running and your private sector isn't ready, the domino effect across sectors is grave. And so I think both administrations really appreciated this. Now, the Trump administration is now working in a different era of, trying to expedite and accelerate certain outcomes with trading partners to correct imbalances on trade that have existed for a long period of time, right? And that is, causing some friction between the U.S. and certain trading partners. It's also allowing for some bilateral discussions to be taking place. So we're seeing outcomes with Japan, with South Korea, with UK.
Not Taiwan yet.
Not Taiwan yet. But I think that there's, a foundation there for the discussions with Taiwan. And I think, what I hope is that we don't over-index on one thing or another. We've seen a lot of investment in supply chains. Biden administration, had the IRA, the CHIPS Act. There was a lot of investment that was being poured into the U.S. Not as much protection of that investment in terms of tariffs on imports that could be, unfairly or illegally priced and compete in our domestic market or third country markets with our companies, right? And there wasn't as much of a demand side pull that we were seeing coming out of the federal government. That's not a slight. It's hard to do all of those things. We call it the build, protect, promote strategy at Silverado. You have to do all three at once. We're seeing a lot of protect under the Trump administration, now starting to see a little bit more on the build side. Got to get that promote in there so that all three things can come together.
I want to thank you so much for having a conversation with us.
Absolutely, it was my pleasure.
Thank you for watching DC Insiders. Please follow us on social media to get the latest episode. See you next time.